Outdated? After everything I've done for this company? I stared at James in disbelief, my voice barely audible in the suddenly silent conference room. "It's nothing personal, Ariana," he replied, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We need fresh perspectives, new blood. The manufacturing industry is evolving, and we need to evolve with it." 20 pairs of eyes watched the exchange. My colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked down at their notebooks, avoiding the spectacle entirely. James adjusted his tie, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "HR has your severance package ready. We'll need your security badge and laptop before you leave the building." The humiliation burned through me. 20 years at Meridian Manufacturing, gone in a 5-minute speech delivered at our monthly staff meeting. I took a deep breath, rose from my chair, and nodded. "I wish you all the best," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I gathered my notepad and pen, the only personal items I'd brought to the meeting, and walked out without another word. "My name is Ariana Vasquez, 49 years old. Until 10 minutes ago, I was the production systems manager at Meridian Manufacturing, one of the largest custom metal fabrication companies in Chicago. I started as an assistant on the factory floor when I was 29 and worked my way up, learning every aspect of our production systems, both the visible ones on paper and the invisible ones that kept everything running smoothly. For 2 decades, I've been the person everyone called when things went wrong, the one who stayed late troubleshooting supplier issues, who knew which machines needed special handling, who remembered that client A needed their orders packaged a specific way, or they'd reject the entire shipment. I created workarounds and solutions that weren't in any manual because I had to. The company grew faster than our documentation could keep up. And now James Henderson, our new operations director who'd been with the company all of 6 months, had decided I was outdated. As I cleaned out my desk, my phone buzzed with messages from a few colleagues expressing shock and sympathy. I appreciated the support, but knew it wouldn't change anything. I boxed up 20 years of personal items in under 30 minutes, a depressingly small collection of photos, awards, and desk trinkets. On my way out, I passed Denise from accounting, who gave me a quick hug and whispered, "This is crazy. You know that new automated inventory system they're implementing next week? No one knows how it integrates with our payment tracking system." I smiled sadly. "I'm sure they'll figure it out." But as I handed my badge to security and walked to my car, a cold realization settled in my stomach. They wouldn't figure it out. Because I was the only one who fully understood how deeply interconnected our systems were, and I had just been shown the door. My relationship with Meridian Manufacturing began when my daughter Sophia was just 4 years old. As a single mother with only an associate's degree, I was grateful for the stable job and threw myself into learning everything I could. The early years were a delicate balancing act: daycare pickups, pediatrician appointments, and late-night studying manufacturing processes after Sophia went to bed. I missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences because we had rush orders. I postponed vacations when systems needed upgrading. I skipped my own mother's 70th birthday celebration because a critical client was visiting. Meridian became my second home, and my colleagues became a kind of family. Robert, the previous operations director who retired last year, recognized my dedication. "You're the glue holding this place together, Ariana," he'd often say. Under his leadership, I was promoted 3 times, eventually overseeing all production systems. Robert understood that my value wasn't just in what I did, but in what I knew, the institutional knowledge that couldn't be captured in procedures or manuals. I tried to document the systems I'd created. I truly did. Every January, I'd start the year with the resolution to get everything on paper. But emergencies always took precedence. A supplier would suddenly go out of business, a machine would break down, or a client would need a last-minute change to a major order. The documentation remained perpetually incomplete, living largely in my head. When James Henderson arrived 6 months ago to replace Robert, I had concerns, but tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He came from a larger manufacturing operation with impressive credentials and talked constantly about modernization and efficiency. At first, I appreciated his fresh perspective. Meridian had grown comfortable with certain inefficiencies, and some processes did need updating. I tried to work with him, explaining the complex web of systems and workarounds that kept our operation functioning. But James seemed more interested in quick wins than understanding the foundation. "We need to streamline," he'd say, waving away my explanations. "All this tribal knowledge is precisely the problem." When he announced plans to implement a new automated inventory system, I raised concerns about integration with our existing processes. "Trust me," he said, "this new system will make everything more efficient." I noticed how he started excluding me from strategic meetings, how younger employees with less experience but more technical degrees were suddenly being given projects that would normally fall under my purview, how my suggestions in meetings were frequently dismissed or interrupted. Still, I never imagined he would fire me. Not when I was the only one who understood how all the pieces fit together. Not when I had given the company 20 years of my life. That was my first mistake. 3 days after my termination, I was still in shock. I'd spent the time updating my resume, though it felt strange to condense 20 years of experience into bullet points. Sophia, now 24 and living in New York, called daily with encouragement and apartment listings in the city, suggesting maybe it was time for a change of scenery. "You've spent your whole life in Chicago, Mom. Maybe this is the universe telling you to try something new." I appreciated her optimism but wasn't ready to make any major decisions. First, I needed to process what had happened. That morning, I met Denise for coffee. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well. "It's been chaos," she said, stirring her latte absently. "The new inventory system went live yesterday, and nothing is working properly." I tried to hide my lack of surprise. Teething problems, new systems always have them. "This is more than teething problems, Ariana. Orders are getting lost, inventory counts are wrong, and no one can figure out why the system keeps rejecting certain client accounts." She leaned forward. "James is freaking out. The executive team is asking questions, and he's telling everyone that you deliberately sabotaged the integration." "What?" I nearly knocked over my coffee. "That's ridiculous. I would never do something like that." "We know that," Denise assured me. "But James needs a scapegoat." As I drove home, my shock turned to anger. After everything I'd given Meridian, James was now attacking my professional integrity. It was beyond unfair. It was potentially damaging to my career if word got out. I was still fuming when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a recruiter, I answered professionally. "Ariana Vasquez speaking." "Ariana, thank God." The voice was immediately recognizable. David Sinclair, Meridian's CEO. "We have a situation." The desperation in his voice was palpable. I remained silent, waiting. "Look, I'll be blunt. The new system is a disaster. We've got orders backed up, inventory missing, and 3 of our biggest clients threatening to pull their contracts if we don't resolve this immediately." He paused. "We need you back." I gripped the phone tighter. "David, James just fired me. He's telling people I sabotaged the company." "James doesn't know what he's talking about," David replied dismissively. "He didn't understand how integral you were to our operations. None of us did, really. We took your knowledge for granted." The validation I'd been seeking for years had finally arrived, but only after everything had fallen apart. Part of me wanted to savor the moment, to let them struggle as I had so many times trying to keep their systems running. But another part, the part that had poured my heart into this company for 2 decades, ached at the thought of everything I'd built crumbling. "Please, Ariana," David continued, his voice dropping to an almost pleading tone. "Come back as a consultant. Triple your previous salary. We'll make it worth your while." I sat in my car, staring at the phone, a storm of conflicting emotions washing over me. They needed me now. But where was this recognition when it actually mattered? After a sleepless night weighing my options, I agreed to return to Meridian as a consultant, but on my terms. I would work remotely, set my own hours, and my contract would include a non-disparagement clause addressing James's false accusations. David agreed immediately, desperation evident in his voice. My first day back was strange. I connected to Meridian's systems from my home office, the familiar interfaces now viewed through a different lens. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a hired gun brought in to save them from their own mistakes. It didn't take long to identify the primary issues. The new inventory system hadn't been properly integrated with the payment tracking system, exactly as I had warned. Moreover, several client-specific workarounds I'd implemented over the years had been overlooked during the transition. The system was trying to force standardization on processes that required customization. I documented the problems and solutions methodically, creating clear instructions for the IT team. By the end of the day, the most critical issues had been addressed, and orders were flowing again. I sent a comprehensive report to David, copying the relevant department heads but deliberately excluding James. The next morning, my inbox contained effusive thanks from David and several other executives. The only message from James was terse. Please copy me on all communications going forward. I replied with professional courtesy, attaching my previous report. Within an hour, he requested an emergency virtual meeting with me and the IT team. When I joined the video call, James's face appeared on my screen, tight with barely concealed anger. Ariana, while we appreciate your help with the immediate crisis, we need to discuss your approach, he began. Some of your solutions seem to be reverting us to the old methods rather than embracing the new system's capabilities. I'm using hybrid solutions that allow the new system to function with our existing client requirements, I explained. Many of our major clients have specific needs that the standard system doesn't accommodate. James shook his head. That's exactly the problem. We've invested in this system to standardize our processes. If we keep making exceptions, we'll never modernize. One of the IT specialists, Tom, unmuted himself. James, Ariana's approach is working. The critical errors have stopped, and we're processing orders again. Temporarily, James insisted, but it's not sustainable. We need to retrain our clients to work with our new standardized system. I muted myself to prevent an incredulous laugh from escaping. Retrain our clients? Some of these companies had been with Meridian for decades and represented millions in annual revenue. They wouldn't change their entire operation to accommodate our new software. The meeting continued with increasing tension. James kept pushing for his vision of complete standardization, while the IT team grew visibly uncomfortable with his dismissal of practical solutions. Later that afternoon, I received an email from James outlining a new direction for my consulting work, essentially asking me to create documentation for his standardization plan rather than fixing the immediate problems. It was a thinly veiled attempt to sideline me while still having access to my knowledge. I wrote a carefully worded response, copying David and the department heads, explaining why this approach would likely result in losing several major clients. I included revenue figures and contract terms to support my position. Within minutes, David called me directly. Ariana, ignore James's email. Continue with your current approach. You have my full authority. It was a small victory, but I knew it was temporary. James wouldn't simply accept being overruled. He would find another way to assert control and push me out again. That evening, as I reviewed system logs to track down a persistent error, I discovered something unusual. Someone had attempted to modify several key configuration files the night before I was fired. The timestamps matched a time when most employees would have been gone, but the building access logs would show who was present. I needed those logs, but requesting them would alert James that I was investigating. I needed to be clever about this. The next day, I called Denise under the pretext of needing clarification on some accounting workflows. Our conversation meandered naturally to the topic of the building's new security system installed last year. It's been a nightmare, Denise sighed. We have to badge in and out of every section, and it logs everything. HR uses it for time tracking now. That sounds tedious, I sympathized. Who manages those logs? Is it still building services? Or did they move that to IT? Neither. Everything's cloud-based now. Department heads can access their team's logs through the admin portal. This was exactly what I needed. Access to those logs would show who was in the building the night before my termination. Interesting, I said casually. Hey, since I'm working remotely, could you send me a link to that admin portal? I might need to check when certain team members were working on specific projects. Once Denise sent the link, I realized I needed login credentials. As a consultant, I no longer had admin access. I considered asking David directly, but worried it might raise questions about my intentions. Instead, I tried my old credentials on a hunch, and they worked. In their haste to bring me back as a consultant, IT had reactivated my previous access levels without adjusting the permissions. What I discovered in the logs sent a chill down my spine. The night before my termination, James had been in the building until nearly midnight, highly unusual for an operations director who typically left by 6 p.m. More importantly, he had accessed the server room using his badge. This coincided exactly with the system logs showing configuration changes. But why would James modify system configurations? He wasn't technical, and such changes would normally be handled by IT. I dug deeper into the system logs and found that the modifications were subtle but significant. Changes that would cause the new inventory system to fail in specific ways when integrated, but only under certain load conditions. The kind of failure that wouldn't appear in testing but would emerge catastrophically in production. The realization hit me like a physical blow. James had deliberately sabotaged the system, knowing it would fail after my departure. But why? What could he possibly gain from creating chaos? I spent the next 2 days discreetly investigating, careful to maintain my consultant duties while pulling on this thread. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Before joining Meridian, James had worked for Vertex Manufacturing, our largest competitor. His LinkedIn profile mentioned it briefly, but downplayed the connection. Further research revealed he had maintained stock options in Vertex even after leaving. Emails I accessed through my reinstated credentials showed James had been quietly advising several of our biggest clients to consider alternatives in the wake of our system problems. In one particularly damning message, he suggested Vertex specifically, noting their superior reliability. The truth was breathtaking in its audacity. James hadn't fired me because he thought I was outdated. He fired me because I was the only person who could prevent his sabotage plan from succeeding. He was deliberately tanking Meridian's operations to drive clients to Vertex, clients he had insider relationships with, clients whose business would significantly increase the value of his Vertex stock options. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I had evidence of corporate espionage and sabotage, but bringing it forward would be risky. James was still an executive with significant influence. If I mishandled this, he could twist it to make me look vengeful or desperate. I needed to be strategic about how I exposed him, and I needed to be absolutely certain of my evidence before making such serious accusations. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect a company that had discarded me after 20 years of loyalty? The answer came to me that night as I stared at my ceiling, unable to sleep. This wasn't just about Meridian or my wounded pride. It was about the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival. People like Denise, who had worked alongside me for years, or Tom from IT, who was putting his kids through college with his Meridian salary. I needed irrefutable evidence and a plan to present it that couldn't be dismissed or buried. James had allies on the executive team, people he'd charmed during his short tenure. Going directly to David might not be enough if James could convince others I was fabricating claims out of resentment. The next morning, I created a secure folder containing all the evidence I'd gathered, the system logs showing the sabotage, the building access records showing James in the server room, and the emails to clients recommending Vertex. I encrypted it and stored it in multiple locations, including sending a copy to my personal lawyer with instructions to open it only under specific circumstances. Then I set a trap. I identified the next likely target in James's sabotage plan, the production scheduling system, which was due for integration with the new inventory system the following week. If he followed his pattern, he would need to make modifications soon. I quietly implemented a monitoring protocol that would alert me to any unauthorized changes, capturing detailed logs of the activity. For 3 days, I continued my consulting work while waiting for the alert. On the fourth night, at 11:23 p.m., my phone buzzed with the notification I'd been expecting. Someone was modifying the production scheduling system's core configurations, and the monitoring protocol was capturing everything, including a video feed from the server room's security camera that I'd managed to access. The footage clearly showed James working on a server terminal, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. I watched in real time as he systematically inserted errors into the system, errors that would cause catastrophic failures once the integration went live. I immediately called David, regardless of the late hour. "I need you to come to the office right now," I said, foregoing pleasantries, "and bring the head of security. James is in the server room sabotaging the production system as we speak." To his credit, David didn't question me. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I forwarded the live security feed to David's email and then called Tom from IT, who lived closest to the office. "I need a favor," I explained. "Can you go to the office and make sure James doesn't leave the server room before David and security arrive?" While waiting for confirmation that James had been caught, I compiled my complete dossier of evidence and sent it to David with a detailed explanation of what I'd found. I included the connection to Vertex and the communications with clients. Just after midnight, David called. "We've got him," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Security is escorting him from the building. The police have been called." I exhaled slowly, tension draining from my shoulders. "You need to secure his computer and phone immediately," I advised. "And contact those clients he's been communicating with. There's no telling how many he's approached." "Already on it," David assured me. "Ariana, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved the company twice in 1 week." "I did my job," I replied simply. "The job I've always done." As I hung up, I felt an unexpected emotion wash over me. Not vindication or triumph, but a profound sadness. 20 years of my life dedicated to Meridian, and it had come to this. Saving the company from someone who had been there less than a year. But mixed with the sadness was something else, the dawning realization that I was finally free to choose what came next. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian's offices in person for the first time since my termination. The security guard greeted me with a surprised smile and a new visitor badge. "Ms. Vasquez, good to see you back." David met me in the lobby, looking exhausted but relieved. "Thank you for coming in. The board is assembling for an emergency meeting, and they've asked you to join." Walking through the familiar hallways felt surreal. Colleagues stopped to greet me, many offering quiet thanks or expressions of disbelief about James's actions. News had traveled fast. The boardroom was filled with tense executives when we entered. David guided me to a seat near the head of the table and began the meeting without preamble. "As you all know, we've uncovered evidence that James Henderson was deliberately sabotaging our systems to drive business to our competitor, Vertex Manufacturing. The police are involved, and we've already contacted our legal team about industrial espionage charges." He turned to me. "Ariana has compiled comprehensive documentation of the sabotage, which has been distributed to each of you. She was instrumental in uncovering this plot and catching James in the act." The board members reviewed the evidence in stunned silence. Finally, the chairwoman, Eleanor Barnes, looked up at me. "Ms. Vasquez, on behalf of the board, I want to extend our sincere apologies for what happened. Your termination was clearly a terrible mistake." "It was more than a mistake," I replied calmly. "It was the result of a systematic devaluation of institutional knowledge in favor of surface-level modernization. James was able to target me precisely because the company had already minimized my contributions." An uncomfortable silence followed. This wasn't what they'd expected. Contrition and gratitude, perhaps, but not a critique of their leadership culture. "You're right," David finally acknowledged. "And that's why we'd like to offer you a new position, Vice President of Systems Integration, reporting directly to me." We need someone who understands both our legacy systems and how to modernize without destroying what works. I smiled. I appreciate the offer, David, but I have a different proposal in mind. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of Meridian Manufacturing, preparing to leave after my final day as a consultant. The systems were stable, thoroughly documented, and managed by a team I had personally trained. The production floor was operating at peak efficiency, and client relationships had been largely restored. James Henderson had been arrested on corporate espionage charges, and Vertex Manufacturing was facing a major lawsuit. The scandal had made industry news, with James's reputation in ruins. Several other companies had discovered similar sabotage attempts in their systems, suggesting his scheme had been more widespread than initially thought. As for me, I had declined Meridian's offer of executive employment. Instead, I'd negotiated a 6-month consulting contract at an exceptional rate to rebuild their systems and train their staff properly. The experience had been cathartic, finally having the time and authority to document everything I'd created over 2 decades, to be recognized for my expertise, and to leave the company stronger than I found it. David approached as I prepared to leave. "Are you sure I can't convince you to stay?" he asked, not for the first time. "I'm sure," I replied. "You have my number if there's an emergency, but the team is well trained now." "And Vasquez Systems Consulting is officially open for business?" he asked with a smile. "With Meridian as my first client reference," I confirmed. "But not my only one. I've already signed contracts with 2 other manufacturers in the region." As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Apartment hunting this weekend still on?" I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. I'm thinking Manhattan might be nice." 20 years at one company had given me invaluable knowledge. The next 20 would be spent sharing that knowledge, on my terms, with proper recognition, and at a consultation rate that reflected my true value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong, it's using their mistake to finally live the life you deserve. "You're late," my mom said as she stepped out onto the porch, pulling her suitcase behind her. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 6:02 a.m. "2 minutes late, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. I got out of the car to help with the luggage, but then I saw her, my sister Lauren, emerging from the house with her own suitcase in tow. My smile froze. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My mom turned to me, her expression far too cheerful for the situation. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this trip." My chest tightened. "Instead of me?" "Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything." She waved her hand dismissively as if I'd just pointed out something trivial. "And we're grateful, sweetheart. But you're always working so hard. You can take another trip later. Lauren needs this right now." Lauren didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She just smirked, shifting her weight onto one hip. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her tone dripping with fake gratitude. I stared at the 2 of them, my heart pounding in my chest. My dad shuffled out a moment later, avoiding eye contact as he handed me his suitcase. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "This was supposed to be our trip, something for me to share with you." "Well, it still is," my mom said with a smile. "Just with Lauren instead. Don't make this a big deal, Violet. Your sister really needs a break." My name is Violet, and for the past 2 years I've been working overtime, saving every spare penny to give my parents a trip they'd never forget. Flights, luxury hotels, guided tours, I planned every detail down to the last dinner reservation. But as I stood there in my parents' driveway, watching my sister get into the back seat of my car, I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. It didn't matter how much effort I put in. In their eyes, Lauren would always come first. I clenched my jaw, biting back the sharp retort sitting on the tip of my tongue. Instead, I forced a tight smile and opened the trunk. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice flat. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. They could go with her. But I wasn't about to let them enjoy it. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly quiet, except for Lauren's incessant chatter. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that, or will the tours take up the whole day?" My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I stared straight ahead, forcing myself not to say anything. My mom chuckled softly. "Of course we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there." I bit the inside of my cheek. When we get there. They didn't even seem to notice I wasn't part of that we anymore. At one point, my dad cleared his throat. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Unusual? That's an interesting way to put it, Dad." He didn't respond. He just shifted uncomfortably in his seat, probably wishing he hadn't spoken at all. Lauren leaned forward from the back seat, her voice grating. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own." I clenched my jaw and forced a tight smile. "Of course, Lauren. Enjoy the trip." By the time we pulled up to the airport drop-off zone, my patience was hanging by a thread. As I helped unload their luggage, my mom gave me a hug. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us, and to Lauren." I nodded stiffly. "Sure, Mom." Lauren beamed as she wheeled her suitcase toward the entrance. "Thanks, Violet. You're the best." I stood there watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with anger and hurt. The ride back home was a blur. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. "This means a lot to Lauren. You're not mad, right? You're always working so hard." I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then without a second thought, I marched into the house, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every travel account I'd used to book the trip. Hotel reservations? Canceled. Tours? Refunded. Airline upgrades? Nope. I stared at the confirmation emails piling up in my inbox, feeling the tightness in my chest start to ease. They wanted to take Lauren instead of me? Fine. But they wouldn't be staying in 5-star hotels or enjoying private tours on my dime. When I closed my laptop, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. They could explain themselves to the front desk staff in Paris. I was done being their doormat. The calls started as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed repeatedly as I unpacked my suitcase, the one I'd packed so carefully for a trip that was no longer mine. The irony wasn't lost on me as I hung up my dresses and neatly placed my shoes back on the shelf. The buzzing continued, filling the room with its relentless vibration. I sighed, picking up the phone and glancing at the screen. My mom's name flashed across it, accompanied by several missed calls and texts. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through the messages. "Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in." "The reservation is missing. Call me immediately." "Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this now." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Fix this? They really thought I'd swoop in and save the day after what they'd done? The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Lauren. I let it ring out, only for her to leave a voicemail. "Violet, this is so petty," she snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. "We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it, now." I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years I'd been their fixer, the one who smoothed over every mistake and picked up every slack. Not anymore. Eventually, I decided to answer, if only to stop the barrage of calls. My mom's voice hit me like a tidal wave of anger as soon as I picked up. "Violet, what did you do? The hotel says the reservation was canceled and none of the tours are booked anymore." I let her rant for a moment, then calmly replied, "I canceled them." There was a long, stunned silence before she hissed, "Why would you do that?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. "Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip. You're lucky I even drove you to the airport." We thought you'd understand, she snapped. Understand what? I asked, my voice rising. That years of saving and planning didn't matter because Lauren needed a break? That my hard work meant nothing to you? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand, and I don't care to. I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off, tossing it onto the couch. The silence that followed was blissful, and I felt like I could breathe again. If they wanted to prioritize Lauren, fine. But they could figure out the rest of the trip without me. The silence lasted only a day. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again with calls and messages. At first, I ignored them. I spent the day cleaning the house and catching up on work, but curiosity got the better of me by evening. I opened my phone and braced myself for the storm of texts. From my mom, "Violet, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears and your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked." From Lauren, "You're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already." And finally from my dad, "We need to talk. This isn't right." I set the phone down, shaking my head. For years, I'd been the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy. Now that I'd taken a step back, they didn't know how to handle it. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, letting the anger simmer. How dare they expect me to clean up their mess? How dare they act like I was the one in the wrong? The next call came minutes later, and this time I answered. "Violet," my mom barked before I could say a word. "This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I took a slow sip of my tea. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail, and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. "Stop being dramatic," she snapped. "Lauren needed this more than you." "And now she can figure it out," I said firmly. "You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me? Fine, but don't expect me to fund her vacation." "We're family," she hissed. "We don't do this to each other." I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. Lauren's voice came through the background, whining, "Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible." That was the final straw. "Enjoy your trip," I said, my tone icy. "Oh, wait, you can't, because it's not your trip. It was mine, and now it's nobody's. Goodbye." I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off again. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of anger and relief. Anger that they'd put me in this position, but relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't letting them take advantage of me. The next few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone turned off, I finally had space to think clearly, free from the barrage of guilt trips and accusations. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the calm I'd craved for so long. My afternoons were filled with work and catching up on little projects I'd been putting off, things that reminded me how capable I was when I wasn't bogged down by their endless demands. But by the third day, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on to find over a dozen voicemails waiting for me. The first few were from my mom, growing increasingly hysterical with each one. "Violet, you need to call me back right now. This has gone too far. I can't believe you're doing this. You've humiliated us. We're your parents. How could you treat us this way?" Then came Lauren's messages, full of the same entitled tone she'd always used. "This is so petty, even for you. You're ruining everything. Just fix it, Violet." And finally my dad's voice, quieter but no less pointed. "Violet, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can sort this out." I hesitated before listening to the final voicemail, a long one from my mom. Her voice was quieter this time, tinged with frustration and exhaustion. "Violet," she began, "we're back at the airport now. The trip is ruined, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Your sister is devastated, and your father and I are, well, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. Call us when you're ready to talk. I deleted the voicemails without replying. I wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of years of them putting Lauren first and expecting me to accept it with a smile. As the hours passed, I found myself reflecting on all the times I'd been overlooked or dismissed. Every holiday where Lauren's whims dictated the plans. Every family gathering where my accomplishments were treated as afterthoughts. This trip had been the breaking point, but the cracks had been forming for years. That evening, Grace stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an unmistakable look of curiosity. "I heard about what happened," she said, setting the coffee on the table. "Your mom called me yesterday." Of course she had. My mom had always been good at recruiting allies when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. "And?" I asked, taking a sip. Grace shrugged, a sly smile creeping across her face. "I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're the best." "No, you're the best," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "Because you finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, Violet. Don't let them drag you back down." Her words stuck with me long after she left. Grace was right. I'd spent too long bending over backward to please people who never seemed to care about my efforts. It was time to break that cycle, once and for all. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was joined by something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations. Freedom from being the family's fixer. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. But as expected, the silence didn't last. It was Sunday afternoon when I finally got a call that I decided to answer. This time, it was my dad. "Violet," he began, his voice heavy with weariness. "Your mom wanted me to call. She thinks you'll listen to me." "Go on," I said, leaning back in my chair. He let out a sigh. "Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset, Lauren's furious, and, well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this." I stiffened, his words igniting a fresh wave of anger. "Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It's just, you've always been the reasonable one. The one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're right, it's not like me. Because I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess." He paused, and for a moment I thought he might finally see my side of things. But then he said, "You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair?" "Fair?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Mom decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Lauren like I didn't matter?" "That's not what we were trying to do," he said, his tone defensive now. "We just thought Lauren needed it more." "Of course you did," I snapped. "You always think she needs more attention, more support, more of everything, and I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her, not anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he said, "I don't know what you want me to say." "I don't need you to say anything," I replied, my voice steady. "I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first. Violet, goodbye, Dad." I ended the call and set the phone down, my hands trembling. For the rest of the day, I let myself feel everything: anger, sadness, relief. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the start of something new. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore, and I wasn't going to be. They could figure out how to clean up their own messes. When my parents and Lauren finally returned, I was waiting for them at their house. I'd parked in their driveway, sipping coffee and feeling surprisingly calm as I watched their taxi pull up. As they stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them, their faces were a mix of exhaustion and irritation. Lauren was the first to speak. "Well, I hope you're happy, Violet." I raised an eyebrow, staying seated on the porch swing. "Happy about what?" "Our trip was a disaster," my mom snapped, waving her hand as if to brush the whole thing away. "We spent the entire week staying in dingy hotels and eating terrible food because we couldn't afford anything decent." "And don't get me started on the tours," Lauren chimed in, crossing her arms. "Oh, wait, there weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation?" I took another sip of coffee, letting their complaints wash over me. "Sounds rough," I said finally, my voice calm. "But you wanted to take Lauren, remember? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time." "That's not the point," my mom shot back, her voice rising. "You knew we couldn't afford all the things you'd planned. You set us up to fail." And I stood up, setting my mug down on the small table next to me. "No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the three of us, something special I'd been saving for years. You're the ones who decided to cut me out at the last second." My dad finally spoke up, his tone quieter but no less accusatory. "You didn't have to cancel everything, Violet. That was extreme." "Was it?" I asked, folding my arms. "Why should I have paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? If Lauren needed it so badly, you should have planned it yourselves. You are lucky that I didn't cancel the return flight." Lauren rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. It's just money, Violet." "And you're so entitled," I shot back, my patience finally snapping. "Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume things magically appear for you because someone else takes care of it?" They stood there, stunned into silence for a moment. "I've spent years being the responsible one," I continued, my voice steady but firm. "The one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly, and you've spent just as long taking it all for granted." "That's not fair," my mom started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, Mom, what's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Lauren over me, like always, so I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine. But you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me." I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned to leave. "I'm glad you're back safely, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done." As I walked to my car, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt. But I didn't look back. The drive home from my parents' house felt strangely peaceful. For years, every visit had left me emotionally drained, but this time I felt lighter. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in, and for once, I wasn't worried about their reaction. When I got back to my house, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch, replaying the confrontation in my head. They'd been so sure I'd fold, that I'd give in like always. But watching their stunned faces as I walked away was a reminder of how much I'd changed. They could be angry, hurt, or embarrassed. It didn't matter anymore. I was done living my life to meet their expectations. The next day, I got a call from Grace. "How'd it go?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I laughed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "Exactly like you'd imagine. They're furious, Lauren's pouting, and Mom is probably trying to figure out how to guilt me back into line." Grace let out a snort. "Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place." I grinned, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Grace. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this." "Anytime," she said, her voice softening. "So what's next for you, now that you're not playing family fixer anymore?" That question had been circling in my mind since the confrontation. What was next? For years, so much of my energy had been poured into trying to please my family, trying to earn their approval. Now that I'd let go of that burden, the possibilities felt endless, and a little intimidating. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I feel like I get to decide. Not them, not anyone else. Just me." "Sounds like the start of something amazing," Grace said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt big in their own way. I redecorated my living room, swapping out the hand-me-down furniture from my parents for pieces that felt uniquely mine. I spent weekends exploring local cafes and parks, things I'd always meant to do but never made time for. And I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and dreams without filtering them through the lens of what anyone else might think. Each small step felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd used to plan the trip. The canceled reservations stared back at me, and I didn't feel a pang of regret. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. Closing the spreadsheet, I opened a new browser tab and typed, "Solo travel ideas." A few weeks after my parents' return, I booked a solo trip to Italy. It wasn't the same itinerary I'd planned for them, and it wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to celebrate my independence and finally put myself first. The moment I landed in Rome, I felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. I'd never traveled alone before, but as I stepped out of the airport and into the bustling city, I knew I'd made the right decision. I spent my days wandering cobblestone streets, marveling at ancient ruins and indulging in meals at charming little cafes. There was no schedule, no one else to consider, just me and the freedom to do exactly what I wanted. One afternoon, while sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato in hand, I pulled out the journal I'd brought with me. For years, I'd written about what I wanted to achieve, but those dreams were always wrapped up in making someone else happy. Now, as I wrote, the focus shifted. Learn a new language, start a small business, travel to at least 5 more countries. The list grew, each goal a reflection of the life I wanted to create, not the one I'd been expected to live. On my last night in Florence, I had dinner at a small family-run restaurant overlooking the Arno River. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. This trip had been more than just a vacation, it was a turning point. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's approval, but here, thousands of miles away, I realized something important. I didn't need it. I was enough, just as I was. When I returned home, my parents tried to reach out again, this time with softer tones and carefully worded messages. "Hope you had a nice trip," one text from my mom read. "Maybe we can all talk soon?" I stared at the message for a moment before setting my phone down. I wasn't ready to reply, and that was okay. This time, it would be on my terms. As I unpacked my suitcase and placed souvenirs on my shelves, I felt a sense of pride. A week after returning from my trip, I received a call from my mom. This time I answered. "Hi, Violet," she began, her tone unusually soft. "How was your trip?" "It was amazing," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "That's good to hear," she said, pausing as if searching for the right words. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we handled things poorly." The admission surprised me, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. "Poorly? You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for without even asking. Poorly is an understatement." "I know," she said quietly. "Your dad and we didn't realize how much it would hurt you." "And Lauren?" I asked. "Does she feel bad too, or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation?" "She's upset," my mom admitted. "But I think she knows she could have handled things better." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's about years of putting her first and expecting me to pick up the slack. I'm not doing it anymore." "I understand," she said after a moment. "We're going to try to do better. We don't want to lose you." Her words tugged at something deep inside me, but I'd learned enough not to let guilt dictate my choices. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "But it's going to take more than words to fix this. I need to see real effort, not just apologies." "You will," she promised. "We'll give you the space you need, but I hope you'll let us back in someday." After the call, I felt a mix of emotions: relief that they were finally acknowledging their behavior, and skepticism about whether they'd actually change. But as I sat down with my journal that evening, I realized something important. Whether or not they changed wasn't my responsibility. Over the following months, I kept my boundaries firm. I responded to their calls and texts when I felt like it, but I didn't go out of my way to fix things or smooth over conflicts. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always dreamed of doing but never had the time or energy for. I joined a local hiking group and even started planning my next solo trip. Each step I took felt like reclaiming another part of myself. One day, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the person who bent over backward for people who didn't appreciate me. I was someone who valued herself, who set boundaries, and who wasn't afraid to stand up for what she deserved. I felt truly free.